Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to CaliforniaProLife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
The Western pro-life movement cares about protecting young mothers and their children from harm. But historically, that's also what the law is designed to do. Will those laws be restored? Yes, they will, and we will show you how on this edition of Life Matters with your host, Brian Johnston. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. You know, language can often be used against you. That's right. People can actually intentionally use words to mislead you. You know that. But do you know how often it happens, and in particular on very important issues? Just the use of an adjective or a verb or a phrase, and the feeling that they want you to get from that phrase may be the exact opposite of the actual meaning that they're bringing to that phrase and the implications of your agreement. Today we're talking about an important poll that was released in July of 2018, conducted by NBC News and co-published with the Wall Street Journal. This poll came out because, as you know, Brett Kavanaugh, the recent nominee for the Supreme Court, is apparently disinclined towards Roe v. Wade, and that's caused great consternation amongst the media. So this poll is about the acceptance and view of Roe v. Wade by the rest of the nation. Just guess what that poll says. Sure, you guessed it. That poll says that 71% of Americans support Roe v. Wade, and just 24% of Americans oppose it. They actually assert that it's gotten higher. This is the highest poll ever to support Roe v. Wade. But you know what? There's something very misleading about that, and it's something that you should be prepared to understand. I did an interview with a good friend of Life Matters, Craig Roberts, the radio station KFAX in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we talk about the meaning of polls and where people really do stand on the life issue, because you have to examine what's really meant and what their actual position is. We did this interview during the fire season in California, and in an earlier story there was reference to a common friend of ours who was up near the fire, and then a reference to CAL FIRE, who is fighting the fires. CAL FIRE is the state of California's branch. I did not know this until I heard this interview from them. Their job is not to put out fires. Their job is very specific. It's to save human lives, first and foremost. That illumined me to what our debate is about. As you know, Life Matters is about the right to life, about the culture that emanates from that idea of the right to life, and then the battle of ideas that takes place around it. Well, you know, there is a culture, and the laws for CAL FIRE, well, that emanates from the concept that human life is valuable. Each and every human being is of extraordinary significance. America's founders said that in the founding, that it's a self-evident truth. That's an important premise, and there's a whole culture that emanates from that premise. And so the fighting of fires, which is not the principal job of CAL FIRE, the fighting of fires reveals the real goal is to protect lives. And that's really the principal purpose of government. So I found that to be very interesting. During this interview, we talked about many other things, including Dr. Gosnell of Philadelphia. There's a film coming out about Dr. Gosnell, which you haven't heard about him. An extraordinary abortionist that did the latest term abortions you could ever do, because he would kill kids even after they did escape the womb, and he felt he was justified under the law to do that. So there's a lot that people don't understand about either the Supreme Court decisions or the practice of abortion today. In the conversation, we do get into a much more accurate poll, I believe, which came out the week before. And that's the Gallup survey, which every year takes a survey of America's actual attitude towards abortion and brings up more of the specifics. And you know what that Gallup survey found? The Gallup survey found that 6 in 10 Americans did support the idea of having abortion legal in the first trimester, but that after that it plummets dramatically in the second trimester. And I'll quote to you, 6 in 10 adults think abortion should generally be legal in the first 3 months of pregnancy. However, support drops precipitously by about half to 28% for abortions conducted in the second 3 months, and by half again to 13% in the last 3 months. So late-term abortion has virtually only 13% support in the United States, and yet these abortions are being done under the name of Roe v. Wade. So the NBC poll isn't really being quite honest when they ask people about Roe, because they're asking people whom they know to be actually somewhat ignorant of the details of Roe and the abortion regimen that has been issued under Roe and Doe v. Bolton. This is a misrepresentation of the facts. Now, gosh, would NBC do that? You tell me. But it's our responsibility to know what the facts are. So I want to encourage you, like Craig at KFAX and other good reportage, listen to folks that get into greater detail. Make sure you yourself know the facts so you can explain it to others. And when we come back, we're going to talk about other aspects of the right to life that you can help advance in your own community, right where you are, to make sure that the law, again, protects those who can't protect themselves.
If you have questions or comments for Life Matters, call 800-924-2490. Give us your name and the town you're calling from and a quick question or comment. Life Matters continues after this.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to CaliforniaProLife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back to Life Matters. As you know, our program is dedicated to the issue of life, to the battle for our culture, and the very real battle of ideas that are influencing our culture. On this program, I was interviewed by a good friend, Craig Roberts. That show is called The Lifeline. We're talking about an important poll that was released in July of 2018. Listen in.
I think it's important, one aspect of this poll, and you'll see this in the pop media, and I think a lot of listeners to KFAX know that the pop media isn't really out to fully inform you. You'll hear it that, most Americans support Roe v. Wade, and then it's assumed that they support all abortion. But most Americans don't really understand what Roe is, and most importantly, the same day that Roe came down was a companion decision that enacts Roe, and that decision was called Doe v. Bolton. That's almost never discussed in the media, but that's what's allowing abortion on demand. As you point out, Craig, and another great poll is the Gallup poll every year that asks about the specifics of abortion. And when you ask even your neighbor or someone next to you at church that says, I'm pro-life, but I don't know if we should restrict it all because, it's all about my religion. I don't want to do it. No, just ask them, wait a second. Are you comfortable with late-term abortions that are done? I mean, look at Gosnell. So a lot of people think that Roe v. Wade only limits abortion to the first trimester. And that's just really not true, and yet that's how it's often presented. The specifics of the issue, we are winning, and winning bigger every year when people understand what it is. Dan at CAL FIRE said something that hit me. He said their job isn't merely to put out fires. Their job is to save human lives. And they'll go back. They don't like having to go back. They'll go back if there's someone caught. They're there to save that life. That's actually the purpose of even having laws in government. And before Roe v. Wade, the laws in every state said, we've got a baby here, and somewhere along the line, the law needs to protect that baby. What Roe said under Blackmun, he said, I don't know when life begins. He literally says that. And then the entire decision dismisses the human life of the child. And it sets up a trimester system. It was Justice Blackmun who set up the abortion clinic system. He said in the first trimester, you don't need that much safety. So he set up these clinics where you could just go in and have an abortion in the first trimester. In the second and third trimester, he stated, well, that's a little bit different. There needs to be more technology involved. But it's not to protect that baby. It's simply so that it goes smoother from the physician's point of view, again, the abortionist. And then what Doe v. Bolton, again, it's not talked about, but it's the law of the land. Doe v. Bolton from the Supreme Court talked about the reasons for doing the abortion. So Roe set up this almost fictional trimester system, and people think, well, it just legalizes it in the first trimester. No. It legalizes it in all three trimesters. In Doe v. Bolton, it gives the reasons. And the reasons can be for just about, you hear about life of the mother. It doesn't say that. It says for the well-being of the mother, and it's the abortionist that determine the well-being. And again, you talk about leading the witness. Here we have the judge explaining to the doctors the thinking they can use. That would include the emotional well-being of the woman. So he's telling the abortionist, you can do late-term abortion. Just have a real cool medical facility, and you get to decide, Mr. Abortionist, if her emotional well-being is at stake, well, go ahead and kill that kid. So under Roe v. Wade, when you understand what it does, and you ask your friends and neighbors, even those who call themselves pro-choice, do you favor unlimited abortion, even late-term? And this poll, when it gets into it, and again, I trust the Gallup poll even more, it actually asks about the specifics. And the majority of Americans, even self-identified pro-choice Americans, they might say yes to Roe because they don't know what it is.
Well, the fascinating thing about not just the research and the outcome of the survey, which again holds pretty consistent to what we've long held going back many, many years, but it's also demonstrative of a very interesting phenomenon. It's the phenomenon I'll call of the bell curve view of life, meaning that the more that we see the advancement of stages of life, that seems to suggest what we're familiar with. So in the case here, you'll find, for example, 60% of Americans that are approving of abortion say that they are okay with it, but only in the first trimester of life. When you get to the second trimester, that number dramatically drops by more than half to just 28%. And then by the time the polling asks about the third trimester, that number drops in half again to just 13% of Americans. Seemingly, the more we see the advancement of stages of development that looks like the baby that we recognize, the more hesitant we are to approve of abortion. And then the other side of the bell curve, of course, Brian, is with the implementation of things like physician-assisted suicide, that we also seem to see a growing trend in our state, that as we reach more toward the final stages of life, we become suddenly and once again less respective of life and therefore more readily willing to dispose of it if it ceases again to look like the vibrancy of life that we all recognize. And so this is very telling, I think, and you're right that these two decisions really go hand in hand, where Roe v. Wade sets up this sort of false dichotomy of trimesters. It's Bolton that really sets on the center stage some of the worst part of the danger of this, in that while the original language of Roe allowed states to implement restrictions in the second trimester and even stronger restrictions in the third trimester, Bolton allowed sort of the get-out-of-jail-free card, and that is the language that would suggest that if, however, any of this is reasonably related to maternal health, that therefore then abortion would be allowed. And it is the gray gray area here, the intentional neutral language of the Doe versus Bolton decision, Brian, that seems to have really set up for not only layers of confusion amongst Americans, but this slippery slope toward life.
That's right. I mean, again, Roe declares, I don't know when life begins, so there's no legal protection for this kid at all. That's what Roe says. And then the Gosnell situation. By the way, a plug for a good friend. There's a movie coming out about Gosnell in October. But the reason that Dr. Gosnell could do what he did is that Doe v. Bolton said, it's the abortionists that get to decide. They're the ones that get to decide whether they want to do the abortion or not. And so if you know the story of Gosnell and it's incredible. It is just incredible. So I'm hoping we can talk about the film as it gets ready to come out. But as Americans understand the grotesqueness of killing vulnerable, innocent children in the womb and even outside of the womb, which Gosnell was doing. He was doing the partial birth abortions. And some of them, he would take the child out. He had to take the head out, and then he would snip. It's just unbelievable. But thank God, Americans do believe in common sense. The language of this battle has been intentionally distorted. We've talked about that many times.
Well, let's look, for example, Brian, the fact that, oftentimes, this will be couched in terms of, when it comes to a woman's right to choose, how do you feel? Well, most Americans that even have a passing sense of appreciation towards our history think about, what a great American ideal. We have the right to choose the church that we attend. We choose the newspapers that we read. We choose the opinions that we express. We can choose the people that we marry. We choose the people we associate with. So American choice is seemingly fundamental to our way of life and to our form of government. So when you pose the question, do you believe in choice? Big percentage of Americans come back and say, absolutely, that's American idealism. And yet, if you are more succinct in describing what you mean by choice and what's driving that choice when it comes to abortion, suddenly then the tables get turned and turned quite dramatically, don't they?
Oh, exactly. I mean, think about it. If you were asked, hey, there's a pastor visiting from Laytonville, California, speaking of rural California, and he wants to babysit your children. Would you be okay with that? Well, you're the pastor. Well, I guess that's okay. And then you find out, well, actually, I didn't tell you everything. You just approved Jim Jones coming and taking care of your kids. So if you're not told the specifics, if it's basically a quick sketch of something that you agree to, and yet there's some very specific actions you are authorizing, that's really not a valid way of looking at the world. And what's really happening now is that Americans are starting to see through this. And it might take a little bit longer in California, but it is happening. And we're seeing this change. And I want to remind pro-life folks in the audience, when your friends disagree with you, be lovable, but do lovingly correct them and talk about the details, the specifics. Understand what Roe really did and what Doe does. And make sure that, study these things. Study to show yourself approved. So you don't have to be ashamed for the position that you've taken. Explain these things in a reasonable way, and we want women help. I have to tell you, you know this. It's Christians who want to help women more than the abortionists do. And so we're on the side of both compassion and common sense. We're on the side of women. And again, speaking of language, Greg, that the majority across the board, not just at church, the majority of women are much more pro-life than the majority of men. So to say that, this is a women's issue, you're just opposed to women. No, actually, more women are pro-life than men are pro-life if you look at generic polling. So we're on the side of common sense. We're on the side of science. We're on the side of compassion. We're on the side of the law. Even as I said, Cal Fire knows that the reason the government exists is to protect lives, and even they're willing to go to extraordinary lengths to protect lives, and the law did that before Roe v. Wade. So Roe will be overturned. Roe and Doe will be overturned, and as you said in an earlier segment, Greg, then it's up to us to watch what goes on in Sacramento laws. Other states will be ready. But in California, our legislators don't hear from you. They think you don't care about laws, that you don't get it. They're the important people that know everything. And you don't want them to have that attitude. You want to lovingly correct them. and show, well, we can vote you out, I guess, but we care. And that's what citizens do. And I think that really Christians should be the best citizens.
Do you have a question about the right to life? Call our Lifeline anytime at 800-924-2490 or visit us online at lifematters.life. Life Matters continues after this.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to californiaprolife.org and register now for Take Back California, August 14th and 15th.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, as we come back from that interview, we want to remind you that this is indeed an election year. And it's in election years that America's founders empowered the American citizen to vote, to change literally those in authority. We're unique in the world, and any place where there's freedom in the world has actually been in emulation of the American model. I don't know if you realize that the Swiss Constitution is modeled almost exactly on the American Constitution. That's because that was a very divided nation. You think our nation is divided. Switzerland is actually 3 different cultures. And each canton is very, very different. There's 3 different languages in Switzerland. So talk about the possibility of confusion and people feeling cut out. But they modeled their constitution, their modern constitution, almost exactly on the American model. So the American freedoms you have are somewhat rare in the rest of the world, but they're appreciated. That's why people come from all over the world here. Don't you forget those freedoms. Please make sure that you're registered to vote. Make sure that your friends are registered. Maybe you should have a voter registration drive at your church or in your local group, your friends. Make sure they're registered to vote, and then make sure they know who to vote for. I'm not going to tell you who that is right now, but you should find out the stances of the candidates and then make sure that you vote for them and get others to vote for them. That's how change ultimately comes. Elections have consequences, and we need to realize those consequences can be either good or very, very dire. In this election year, make sure you know what's going on in California. Go to the California Pro-Life Council webpage. That's californiaprolife.org, and look up the stances of candidates there. Find out locally about your local candidates by touching base and finding out who your local pro-life chapter is. Are there people getting these questions out to candidates? If not, we can help you. We can help you start or build up your local chapter so that they're paying attention to civics. Very often, pro-lifers forget that if you don't pay attention to civics, you're not going to change, ultimately, this dire situation we have. We must be good citizens. So make sure you do that. And wherever you are in the nation, if you're listening by podcast or on another station, make sure that you go to nrlc.org and the National Right to Life Committee and its affiliates. And there's an affiliate in every state in the nation that does pay attention to the life issue, that specifically understands the need, and it's diverse people committed to restoring the laws to again protect those that can't protect themselves. As we said, that's the reason CAL FIRE exists. It isn't even to put out fires. It's to protect human beings that now can't protect themselves from a dire situation like a fire. That's the reason laws are there. That's the reason policemen have guns and badges, is to protect vulnerable people from those who might do them harm. So when we talk about the right to life, we're talking really about a very essential premise. We've said it before, it isn't just about, it's good that your faith affirms that and the dignity of that child and of that vulnerable grandma. It's great that your faith affirms that. But the reason it does is because objectively in Western civilization, that's been a premise of Western civilization. Don't go around killing the innocent. This is such an important premise. There is so much more at stake, and we've talked about that many times in many different ways on Life Matters. There is so much at stake in the right to life debate that if you don't grasp it, If you get on a tangent that somehow it's a personal cause of yours, this isn't personal. This isn't about me, to be honest, or my opinion. This is about something that exists outside of me and you. It isn't because I believe that baby is unique. Science tells me that's a unique baby in every way. Even the cell of that child dictates that the DNA is so incredibly unique. Science, it has more and more revelations about the facts of life every day and every year. So we want to stand and equip you to stand for what's right and why those laws were there before 73. If you've heard about the background on those laws, you'll realize it was science and medicine working together with the law to protect those children right after the Civil War and on until the 1880s. And then every state that came into the nation then insisted that that child have protection. We want to restore that view of life and of vulnerable people again. It's an essential premise of our culture, and that's what you're fighting for. We want to help you do it. We want to help you do it right where you are, to encourage others to have an understanding of why it's an important battle, and we want you to win. So make sure you tune in to Life Matters. Go to lifematters.life to hear more, or nrlc.org to get equipped for the national and your state fight. And if you're in California, yes, go to californiaprolife.org. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week with more important information as we lead up to decision time in election year 2018. Be equipped, be ready. It's a battle of ideas, and ideas that are enforced are called laws. Those laws really belong to you in our democracy. Make sure that you're using your voice. Make sure that you're standing up for those that can't stand up for themselves.
Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life, where you'll find all the resources you need to protect life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life. Wherever you are in the nation, you can find out more at National Right to Life. You can find vital pro-life information and also find the access to your state and local Right to Life affiliate. Get informed and get involved.
Did you know that the most radical legislature ever in California history is preparing to pass some of the most radical legislation in American history when they come back in August? Are you going to stand for that? Join us at the Take Back California Conference with John Cox and many of the good pro-life legislators and candidates. Go to californiaprolife.org and register now for Take Back California August 14th and 15th.